Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Sustainable Housing Series. You'll notice that Sam Evans-Brown, Clean Energy New Hampshire Executive Director, is going to be our featured story for today. If we haven't met, I'm Beth Sansucci. I'm the Deputy Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire, and I also serve as the staff liaison with the Young Professionals in Energy Initiative. Young Professionals in Energy, also pronounced YPiE. If you're not familiar with the group, it brings together New Hampshire's rising energy leaders and professionals that realize a more modern and innovative energy future for our state. So if you're interested in learning more about the initiative, please feel free to send me an email at beth@cleanenergynh.org. We will also follow this recording. I will follow up with this recording as well as other materials that we discuss in today's webinar. So for today, we're here for the second part of our webinar series. So as many of you know, it's a tough housing market in New Hampshire, and it's one of the main reasons why young people can't afford to live or relocate here. So introducing people to sustainable home design, renewable energy is critical to the future of the state. And given the rising cost of purchasing a home, it's important to understand the energy costs around home ownership and what measures can be done to reduce these costs. So during today's session, Sam will show us around and tell us about the cost-effective sustainability renovations done to his home and the resources that are available to fund these endeavors. If you do have any questions, like Sam mentioned, feel free to drop those in the chat and I will make sure to tap and interject appropriately. I think that's about it. So Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Beth. And as I mentioned before, Bob Irving, who was our contractor for this house, is on the line and can help answer the questions as well. But maybe, since the title of the webinar is Sam's story, we could just start with the story a little bit. We moved to Concord in 2011. It was the end of the foreclosure crisis. We lucked out in that regard, in that we both had fallen into reasonably good jobs at a time when the housing market was the polar opposite of what it is today, and bought a property that we were told it was about $600 short of being a short sale, which is to say the homeowners themselves were almost upside down on their mortgage and they were just looking to get out. And that house had, before we even moved in and could get insurance on it, we had to get a new furnace, we had to get new wiring, we needed a new roof. And of course, it had, pretty minimal energy efficiency characteristics. So one of the first things we did was get it enrolled in the New Hampshire Saves program and get it all insulated. And we spent about 3 years living in that house, doing a lot of, putting in a lot of sweat equity, a lot of renovations that we did on our own, which, looking back, there's a lot I would have done differently. I made a lot of mistakes as a home carpenter and, learned how to tile. But when I look at the shower that I tiled, it wasn't great craftsmanship, but I learned how to do it. So, and then after 3 years, we were looking to start a family, and there was a lot of lead-based paint in that house, and we were feeling uncomfortable about it generally, but also it just wasn't our forever home, as they say. We started looking around, and actually where we first looked, we'll see if we can give you any sense of this. So we're out just on the outskirts of Concord, and if you could see through those trees right there, you would see our neighbor's house. And that house was on the market, and what we really fell in love with was the location. We're 3 miles outside of town. It's close enough that I can bike to work or even walk to work occasionally if I'm looking for a really long morning walk. But we're out, in the heart of the trail system that Concord, New Hampshire has to offer. So it's a really, really cool spot. And the only reason we didn't immediately put an offer in on our neighbor's house was because it had a pool, and we just couldn't imagine ourselves as pool owners. But I kind of got over that, and we decided, okay, we're going to be pool owners. We're going to put in an offer on this house. But before we could, it had been snapped up by somebody else, our now lovely neighbor John. But as we reached out to the realtor again, she mentioned that there was a lot, and that the owner of the home that we had tried to purchase had 40 acres and had subdivided out 3 buildable lots next door. and that the one that was for sale was the log landing. They had logged the property, and so it was already cleared and sort of ready to build. And so then we had to ask ourselves another question, which is, can we imagine ourselves as the type of person who, the type of people who build a brand new home? And after sort of sharpening our pencils and talking to some builders, we figured that we could just barely afford it by sort of scrimping and saving for a couple of years, and then we'd get a house that we definitely knew we'd want in a place that we want. And so we jumped in and signed the paperwork with Bob. So some nuts and bolts. The property cost us a little over $100,000, and the house, if it had been built to spec by Bob, turnkey, and this is 2015 prices, right? So all these prices will have risen by a quantity that I'm not sure how much. Turnkey built by Bob was going to be $250,000, but because we were looking to save as much as possible, we said, what are things on the list that of everything that needs to be completed for the house that we can do ourselves? And so when we moved in, there was no flooring. The kitchen sink was just sort of propped up on cabinets that were not fixed. There was a toilet and a sink because we're required to have those for the certificate of occupancy. But it was plywood and sheetrock, and the outside of the house was still just sheathing. We did the siding and all the rest ourselves as well. And as you'll point out, I'll immediately go to the defects of the house. You'll see, and Bob might appreciate this, we have still not finished trimming everything in the house because we had kids, and all work immediately stopped as soon as we had our first child. But largely, if you look at these little trim details, these shelves, this toy bench, those lighting fixtures behind me, the banister, those are all things that we did ourselves as a way to make it more affordable. And I'm not sure, we had started a spreadsheet at one point to try to keep track of exactly how much we saved, but I think the all-in cost wound up being something closer to, I think we saved ourselves about $30,000 by doing a lot of that work ourselves. So that's just sort of the nuts and bolts. The numbers that Bob gave me, and again, he's here and can answer these questions with more specificity, is that the housing style that we chose probably costs about 10% more than if we had just built a standard home. But as I'll get into, there's a very, very fast payback on that investment in more insulation and more air sealing. So this is the house. Basically one big room here on the main floor. That's the front entryway behind me there. And then we have a loft upstairs, which is absolutely littered with kids' toys, so I'm not going up there. And then behind me, behind that it's a pocket door. Behind that is 2 bedrooms and the bathroom. Downstairs, we have a full basement that can be finished. It is not finished yet, and we'll wander down there a little later. This house, and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that this follows a school of design that is referred to as the Pretty Good House. And there's actually a brand new book out by a bunch of the folks who collaborate on that idea. Emily Mottram is the builder whose name I remember, and Beth's going to pop this into the chat. That prettygoodhouse.org is where you can learn more about the Pretty Good House. And the idea here was that there's all sorts of certifications and green labels and sort of hoops you can jump through to prove that a house is green. And the Pretty Good House says, what are the things that are most cost effective that you can do with essentially any building that will pay for themselves very quickly and won't sort of bog you down in certification. And so that's the school of design that Bob followed. And it was his quote, his bid was more competitive than the other builders that we were contacting, all of whom, by the way, were sort of high efficiency builders. And B, having now lived in the house since 2015, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we absolutely love living here, and the house, as you can see right now, like no lights are on. It's very bright. It's very open. It's really nice it's a very nice space to be in. And the efficiency is just astonishing. And I'll pop into those later. The other resource I direct folks to if you want to learn more is a really wonderful Instagram account / website by an architect whose name I'm forgetting, but the website is called Building Science Fight Club. And again, these resources are really towards learning more about a school of building design that is focused on performance and not focused on, winning plaudits. it's about building something. It's about transforming the building industry with practices that are the most cost effective. So what I learned from Building Science Fight Club, subsequently to moving to this house, that there are the three most important things with when it comes to the energy efficiency of a home. The first, the most important, is what's called the glazing ratio, which is how many windows you have, and also how good are those windows. So this house has a glazing ratio of 15%. So 15% of the surfaces are windows, and they're very high performance windows. This is one of the things we splurged on. So these are what are called Intis windows. They came on a boat from Germany, and it took 4 months for them to arrive. They're a European style tilt-turn window. So if I go like this, they tilt open like that. It's still closed at the bottom, but opens at the top. And if I go like this, it swings open, and you get a great big open. And actually, this one we take the screen out of because we sort of pass food out to that picnic table when we are having dinner or lunch out on the patio. So not only does the house have a fairly low amount of windows compared to, for instance, my parents' house, which has closer to a 25% glazing ratio, but also the windows themselves are very high performance. They're not your traditional sash and sill window that have all sorts of spots where they can leak. It's a casement window that fully seals whenever it closes, and also it's triple glazed. There's some complicated math behind why this matters, but in my opinion, it is worth investing in good windows, particularly if you're investing in windows and also investing in the air sealing around them, which gets us to the second most important thing. So first most important thing in the efficiency of a building is the glazing ratio, having as low a glazing ratio as is practical. Oh, and by the way, another point on the windows while we're on the windows. Most of the windows are on the south-facing side of this house, right? This is the south side. And if we were to go into the bedrooms, which I'm not going to do because I definitely follow the middle school approach to cleaning the house because the bedrooms are still a mess. I just threw a bunch of stuff back in there. There are very few windows on the north side of the building. And there are a couple on the east and west side, but definitely most of the glazing is on the south, which, since we're in the northern hemisphere, means in the winter, those are mostly a net energy gain from the sun shining in during the winter months. And since we're in a heating climate, you should worry more about what is the performance of the home in the winter versus what is in the summer. In the summer, the sun is high, and we have a pretty good overhang on the eave. You might not be able to see it. So not a lot of sun comes in through those winters in the middle of the day, through those windows in the middle of the day anyway. And again, they're high performing windows. So the winter is more important than the summer. So good windows, mostly on the south. Not too many of them. And as you can see, it's really bright in here. So even though we have a fairly low glazing ratio, my experience of the home has been that we need much less lighting than, for instance, in my parents' house, where they have even more windows, but they're just sort of they're scattered a little haphazardly, and so the glazing ratio is higher. But I find that house to be much darker than ours. So glazing ratio is number one, and the second is air tightness, right? So insulating a house obviously is very important, but actually air sealing a house is even more important. And again, this has been proven over and over by building scientists that you can take a house and spend $10,000 on insulation or $2,000 on air sealing, and the air sealing will have a greater impact. And one of the party tricks that I show for this house that unfortunately you all won't be able to experience is we have a range hood here over the stove, very important for health and safety. Public service announcement: always vent your kitchen when you're cooking because particulates are bad for your lungs. And you can turn on the range hood, and when that hood is going, if I open this door, the house is so tightly air sealed that there's nowhere for the air to come from except for through this door that I'm opening. So one of the party trick is that you can feel the door pushing against me when I open it, and if I let it go, it just flies open just because of the force of the suction coming from that range hood. The house is very well sealed. It has fewer, for the nerds in the audience, it does fewer than 1 air change per hour. So I think it was 0.6 was what it came down to. And that's really, really important. And this is where what I advise everyone is this is where it really pays to interact with a builder who gets this stuff, because good air sealing is like a question of just craftsmanship and sweating the details. Bob and crew did, I think, 4 blower door tests throughout the course of the construction at various stages to check how they're doing on the air sealing. They used those blower door tests to chase down all the little cracks and crevices that needed sealing up. And there are a lot of builders who will say, oh yeah, I'm a high efficiency builder, but they're not sweating the details. And it's really important to have someone who's sort of mission driven, who gets it and is doing that, because frankly, unless you're really sweating the details, you will miss a lot. And as a homeowner, as you're watching it being built, you're not going to know, you're not going to be there as they're putting up the cladding to know, did they really roll the tape on the seams between your cladding on the exterior house? You really need to find someone for whom this is something that is not just marketing, but it's part of what drives them. So air sealing, glazing ratio. Here's where we get into another fun fact, another way this house is different. So all through the house, you'll see these, those are vents. So there was a wave of energy efficient construction in sort of the 80s and 90s, when this was all sort of new and experimental, and maybe in some earlier buildings where they did not introduce mechanical ventilation. And a lot of those buildings had moisture problems because, you'll hear builders say a house needs to breathe. And so they use that as an argument against energy efficiency. And there's a nugget of truth there, right? Which is that if you just build a very, very tight house, there's no way for the water to get out of the house, and you can wind up with mold problems, which is why mechanical ventilation is really, really, really important in these more energy efficient homes. The upsides mechanical ventilation, though, is it improves the air quality in the building, which is another, again, PSA about the range hood. PSA generally, there is almost no regulation of interior air quality in the United States. When you go outside, they regulate power plants and smog and all these things, and you can have levels of pollution in your own home that are actually higher than what is allowed by the EPA outdoors, because the EPA does not regulate, has no regulations about interior air quality. So yes, this mechanical ventilation is an increased cost in the, it's one of those things that adds to the 10% that makes a home like this slightly more expensive to build up front, but you get an added benefit, which is a healthier home, along with a cheaper to operate home that pays for itself quite quickly. So that's the register. If we go into the basement, which is definitely a mess, I'll show you the unit itself. As you can see, so the basement is not finished. I'm just gonna give selective shots here so that you don't see the true mess. But this is what's referred to as a heat recovery ventilator. There are more expensive ones, typically referred to as energy recovery ventilators. And what's happening in this unit is that, you can see the ducting that goes all throughout the house. There are exhaust pipes that are pulling stale air out of the house coming in this way. And then there are intake pipes that are pulling fresh air into the house from that way. And the stale air is crossing with the fresh air in a core in the middle here. And it's pulling some of the heat out of the stale air and pre-warming the fresh air before it comes in. And I'm not 100% sure what the efficiency numbers are for this unit. Again, you can spend a little bit more, you can get a more efficient unit that pulls more of that heat out. But it means that you're not getting, in the middle of the winter, you're not getting 20-degree air blast on you. You're getting pre-warmed air that's coming out of those vents. And as you know, there's two things that are happening there. One, you can see the slightly dirty condensate lines that I should be cleaning. That you're getting the humidity is condensing out of the air on some of the surfaces in there, and also a lot of the humidity gets exhausted as well. But also you're getting fresh, clean air that is being filtered. There's filters on either side. It's filtering the air as it comes in. So again, you're improving the air quality in your house.
I was just wondering, I think Bob probably needs to head out pretty soon, so I wanted to see if he had anything to add to the conversation before he has to leave.
Yes, I do have a couple of things to add. Can you hear me okay?
Go for it, Bob. Yes, we can hear you.
First of all, I just wanted to start that what I think the most important things are in building the house. The house came from a passive house course that I took, and the guys in Maine took it also, which is essentially a course teaching about the physics, how physics works in a house. And if you build a house to utilize the physics, it works a whole lot better. And the most important factor in a house like this is what Passive House calls the envelope, which is the entire area in the house that you use. And most people think, well, that's the first floor and the second floor if it's a two-story house, but it doesn't include the basement or the attic where we keep our suitcases. Actually, it does. So in most houses nowadays, you don't have unless it's a cape, a lot of the walk-up attics have been eliminated and it's just insulation, but the basement is virtually never insulated and it needs to be. That's a critical step in the house. And Sam can talk more about that. He's in his basement right now. So think of your house as like a cooler or something. Everything that you want to maintain that temperature has to be in the cooler, and you can't eliminate spaces that are already in the house, like the basement. You'd like to, but you can't. The second most important thing is the air tightness, and Sam and I agree that that's number two. So I think the first thing I would say is the envelope. Number two is air tightness. Number three is the basement, and number four I would say are the windows, because you can achieve a much better result than normal in an existing house if you make it airtight and seal it well and put a ventilation system in. That'll give you a lot of the way there. Better windows help, but in a renovation, for instance, they're one of the last things that are really important, unless they're really old, single glazed and leaking. But most windows, the failure isn't through the window itself, it's with the space between the window and the wall, which is never very well insulated. So there's a bunch of things about that, but I would say think of the envelope that you're living in. Think of make the house as airtight as you can. Code in New Hampshire, I don't know if it's 6 or 7, it's been changing, but the national code is 3. Most of my houses have been 1 or below, and it makes a huge difference. So and ventilation is wonderful. I just did my old house, and it's great. And I want to put one final plug in for my friend Wes Golem, who he and I wrote a book together, which came out. It's on Amazon, and he's selling it now at bookstores. But it's called Warm and Cool Homes. It's similar. I don't actually have the Pretty Good House book yet. That just came out. But Wes looked at 5 houses. He profiled 5 houses like this, 2 of which I built, and 3 were built by individual owners. So it's very interesting. I'll have to compare it later to the Pretty Good House book, but all of us are building the same thing. So that's all. That's my rant. So thank you very much, Sam, and I'm glad you like your house.
Thank you, Bob. And for those who think that Bob and I disagree about windows, actually don't think we disagree. We also renovated our old house, and we did not focus on the windows in renovating our old house, right? So the payback on windows really comes down to the air sealing around them. So it almost matters less in a renovation what window you buy, and it matters much more the detailing of how those windows are installed. But when I say, you know, I'm sort of resorting to the building science fight club hierarchy. And when I started with windows, it's really about the glazing ratio, right? So how many windows, and that's why, you know, the last webinar was about a renovation, and this is really about building new, right? Because that's what we got to do. And when you're building new, you can think about your glazing ratio ahead of time. So Bob and I do not disagree about windows. If you were doing a renovation, I would definitely put the windows down fourth after all the other items that Bob mentioned. So thank you, Bob. Thank you for being here. Thanks for jumping in. And so while we're down here, okay,
you're welcome.
Yeah. So we mentioned, so one, glazing ratio, two, air tightness. But while we're down here, let's get to insulation, which is number 3 in the Building Science Fight Club's hierarchy. And this really does, you know, air tightness and insulation together. That's sort of like your envelope, right? That those two things are what determine your envelope. So the other things that make this house differently is that there is insulation under the slab. Of course, we have sidewalk chalk down here because, again, we have kids. So there was I'm going to forget exactly how many inches, but there's essentially, you know, very inexpensive polystyrene insulation down there. It basically looked like a giant slab of styrofoam cups that they put underneath the concrete before they poured the concrete. So there's insulation under the slab. That insulation system is tied into the walls insulation system, which was applied. You can see it here. This is again rigid foam insulation with these sort of screws. These are plastic screws that they drilled into the concrete walls of the foundation and use these screws to fix in. There's 4 inches of rigid foam on all of the basement walls. And then if we keep going up a little bit, this is spray foam, right? That was applied to the rim joist. So the rim joist is I might be using that term wrong, but the rim joist is I believe anyway, if I'm using the term right, is where the walls connect to the foundation, and there's basically just lumber here, and there's cracks in between that lumber, and that's a huge source of air infiltration into your normal house. And so that is all covered up with a coat of spray foam. Spray foam, for those who don't know, you know, a very high performing product. It got a bit of a bad name when it was first rolled out because the accelerants that were used to blow the foam up had health impacts for the workers and also had a really high global warming potential. That has largely been cleaned up, and they're using much lower global warming potential accelerants in spray foam these days. And you know, and generally speaking, that insofar there are health concerns for the workers who are installing it, that's taken into account, and they're wearing protective equipment, and they're advising homeowners to not be in the house for the initial off gassing of those accelerants when they're first installed, which is usually like a 12 to 24 hour period. But again, this is the stuff, like this is sweating the details, right? Like here we can see a little bit of the detail work that was done, making sure that the house was air sealed so that it could achieve that party trick effect that I was talking about. So those are the 3 sort of efficiency design characteristics of the house that are probably the most relevant to talk about, and we can talk more about other aspects if folks have questions. But if not, I'm going to move on. So we have, just to sort of lay it out, this house is 100% electric. There's no fossil fuels that are consumed. We do have a cordwood stove, which in the summer we put our kitchen table on top of it so that we can have more space in the living room. But in the winter we do burn cordwood as well as heat with a mini split. That's an air source heat pump. We can, if folks are curious, I can go on for a while about why we decided to have 2 sources of heating. But to give you a sense, the house uses on average about 600 kilowatt hours of electricity a month, which means we're almost exactly average for the state of New Hampshire. that pretty much defines the average for consumption in New Hampshire. And we have that average electricity consumption, even though our heating is electric, right? On top of the electric heat, we burn less than a cord of wood a year, which we split. I split myself, and it comes entirely from trees that fall down when the wind blows on the property. So if you were to include the cost of a cord of wood, which is maybe $300 if I were to buy it, on top of the cost of the electricity for the house, it's very affordable. And I actually don't know what the cost normally would be, because as I'll show you in a second, we have solar, which means that our electric bill each month is the minimum bill. We pay $16 a month for our electric bill. And if you add that up over the course of the year, it means our total energy bill for the year is under $200 to heat this house, heat and cook our dinners and light our evenings. And I will say that is not $200 a year to be shivering in the cold, because the stove, if you could see it, which is under here, it's the smallest stove that Hearthstone makes. But it still is overpowered for the heating requirements of this house. So if we put in more than 2 logs into the stove, very quickly the temperature gets up to like 80 degrees in here. So when I say that we spend $200 a year on our energy, we spend $200 a year, and we are very comfortable. And that's another, I think, underappreciated feature of a house like this, which is that it's just incredibly comfortable to be in it. Not just for the health impacts that we talked about with the fresh air being pumped into the house all the time, but also just temperature wise, the temperature is very even. I joke that having made the decision to build this house resolved 50% of our marital disputes, because I was always turning the thermostat down and my wife was always turning it back up again because she was too cold. And that's just like not a problem in this house. It's really, really easy to heat it. In the winter, we'll often have one fire at night. We'll get home from work. It'll be, maybe a little chilly in the house if we've left the heat off during the day. The house will get up to, 72, 75. And then we'll go to bed. We'll let the fire die down. We'll wake up, and the house is usually, 62, 65 by the time we wake up, with no heat on overnight. And without, you don't even have to bank the fire. We don't throw a ton of logs in. We just let it die out when we go to bed. And then as soon as the sun comes up in the winter, you start to get the solar gain. If it's a sunny day, you start to get solar gain through the windows. The house stops getting colder. It stays at 62, 65 degrees all throughout the course of the day, just from the heat of the sun. And then, the sun starts to go down at like 3:30 because it's the winter. And then the temperature in the house starts to drop again, but we get home and we make another fire. And if we wanted to keep it at 70 all winter long, we could just turn on the heat pump, which we don't tend to do just because we're maniacs. So that's the sort of the magic of this house, is that it just keeps itself warm all throughout the winter. And the same thing happens in the summer, where so on a really hot day, what we do is we open all the windows at night, right? Open everything up at night. I put a fan up in that window, doing this, that window upstairs, blowing outward. And so it's sucking in the cool night air all night long. And then we close up all the windows during the day. And usually the house just sits at like, maybe, even if it's 90 degrees outside, the house will sit at like 75 degrees all throughout the course of the day. It'll start at like 70 in the morning, and by the evening it's up to 75. So it performs really well. In fact, it was one of those things where Bob told us how houses like this are to live in, and I frankly didn't believe a lot of it until we started to live in it, and it's just like, my God, it's so much nicer. So I mentioned the solar. So we'll go on a little tour of the solar. Oh, so one of the ways that we made this affordable, you as a homeowner in the state of New Hampshire can do all of your electrical work on your own. We did our solar on our own. And so there's the garage, by the way, which we built after the fact. So there behind me, that's the first solar array that we did. I reached out to a friend who works for a solar company. He sent me to alt-e-store, altestore.com, I think. And alt-e-store will help you. You like send them a layout of your roof, and you send them your electric bill, and they will help you design a solar system, and they ship everything to you on a pallet. And so a pallet arrived at our house with essentially everything we needed to install this array. And then my friend who works for a solar company helped me do it. Quick plug here. we have a metal roof, and it's a standing seam roof. If you have the opportunity to put solar on your house, or if you're going to put a new roof on your house and are thinking about solar, I cannot recommend highly enough a standing seam roof. The reason being that when you install through shingles on a solar array, you have to drill through the shingles, so you're creating penetrations into the roof. And a standing seam roof instead just has these little clamps that clamp right onto that seam that's sticking up right there. So there's zero penetrations to the roof. And also, more to the point, this is one of the the downsides to residential solar that sometimes goes under acknowledged, which is that if you have to replace your roof, having solar on the top of it can double the cost of having to replace your roof. And so, in my opinion, if you have solar, you should really be thinking about a metal roof, because essentially, I don't know if this is 100% true or not, but people say metal roofs simply last forever. And so it's worth a few $1,000s extra to never have to worry about that. And if you do standing seam, it makes the installation really, really simple. So like me and a buddy put this array on my roof in 3 half days. He would show up at like 10 and we would knock off at 2 and like hang out, have a beer, go swimming. And we did that for 3 days, and we were able to install that array. And then because you're the homeowner, you can pull your own electrical permit. And he sort of stood over my shoulder and made sure I didn't electrocute myself while installing the inverter. This whole system cost us $9,000. Then we had the federal tax rebate, which of course you have to have tax liability to be able to monetize, but that was worth 30% of the system, and will be again thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. There is again, so $3,000 off my taxes, and then at the time the state still had residential rebates, and so I believe the state gave me another $2,700 as a rebate, as a check for the system. So the sort of net cost of this was whatever the math is there, $3,027, $5,700. It was more like $4,000 to install that first array. And again, that makes it so that our electrical bill is $16 a month. Net metering has been tweaked in the state of New Hampshire. It's a little less remunerative now, but solar has also gotten much better in that short span, which brings me to solar array number 2. So this was installed this spring and is actually not mine. This belongs to a friend of ours. So we met a new friend this past year. His house is completely surrounded by trees. And because I have the job I do, I know a lot about our net metering statutes. And I said, well, we can expand our system and then we can group net meter over to your house and you'll get a credit on your bill. And so we drew up this very complicated, much more involved than it needs to be, lease agreement. He's leasing our roof for $0 a month. And then the bill credit for that array is being put onto his account. And the little caveats here, because this system was installed in 2015, we're grandfathered. And in fact, the Public Utilities Commission issued an order specifically about systems like this, that you can expand a residential system and still be grandfathered into the old net metering rate. So in fact, my friend also gets the old net metering rate, which, we're lucky. Not everyone gets that. The new one is again, slightly less remunerative. But that's the solar array. And that total is about 9 kilowatts. So ours is 4.3 and his is 4.8. And this is where it gets interesting. So each of these panels is 260 watts. Each of these panels is 400 watts. So in so 2015 and 2022, in 7 years, the capacity in terms of the space rose by, I'd have to do some better calculations to figure this out, but the technology is already dramatically better just in that 7-year period. And we actually quoted, we got a quote from Revision for them to do this work for us. They quoted us $18,000 installed to do that array, and this cost $16,000. So he got more capacity in less space for less money 7 years later. So it is true that net metering is not as generous as it was when we installed our panels, but the technology has improved so fast that solar is still has a killer payback. It probably pays back better than anything in your IRA if you have an investment. account. So that's the solar array. And I believe there's some laundry back there drying behind me if we, just to stick with the theme of my life's a mess. And then the last thing I will show you is that we did not have this built when we first finished because we were on a really tight budget, could barely make it work. But in 2019, we built this garage, and what that has allowed us to do is clean out the basement. And soon, all my bikes, all the toys used to be in the basement. Now they're in this garage, which means that we'll be able to finish the basement and put a third bedroom downstairs and a second bathroom eventually when our kids are old enough that they do not want to be in the same room together. And yes, and then the sort of like to finish out our like decarbonization journey in December, we bought a used 2013 Nissan Leaf. Which again, to fit with this theme of like this stuff actually is affordable. That was 50,000 miles on it. And it was less than $10,000. And so that has eliminated 90% of our trips in the other car, which now is sort of our weekend mobile, which is a Volkswagen Jetta. For our day-to-day, we're able to do almost everything we need to do, even in this sort of janky old EV. So. So probably here, I left my notes inside, which I'll have to go in and get in a second. But maybe we could just, while we're out here, we could talk about the incentive programs that we accessed. So anyone who's looking to build or to renovate should look up New Hampshire Saves. For new buildings, the program is called Energy Star for New Homes. And that essentially there's two benefits to signing up for Energy Star for New Homes. The first is they send an energy auditor who's looking over your contractor's shoulder. In our case, Bob didn't really need anyone looking over his shoulder. Our energy auditor was a wonderful man named Kevin Hanlon, who does really, really great work. A friend of mine referred to Kevin as a Boy Scout. He really, he really tries to make sure that it's being done the way it's supposed to be done. And so that's the first benefit of Energy Star for New Homes. If you happen to have, had the bad luck of being sort of scooped up by a contractor who talks about energy efficiency, but doesn't necessarily live and breathe it, having an energy auditor on site, particularly when he's doing the inspection of the insulation work, is hugely important. And not only that, Kevin did at least one of the blower door tests that one of the 4 that was done on this house to verify its performance. But then the second benefit is they hand you a check. So we got a $4,000 rebate because this house maximized the amount of energy efficiency. As Kevin said to me, we did the final test. And he said, "Well, you buried the needle." So it's as energy efficient as and it got the maximum rebate. My parents' house, for instance, so I helped my parents go through this process, and they got a slightly smaller check because of the glazing ratio. Their glazing ratio was too high, and so they did not bury the needle. And so that's the Energy Star for New Homes is the efficiency program that the utilities administer for new homes. The one for existing homes is called Home Performance with Energy Star, but all of those are under the New Hampshire Saves banner. That's the overarching sort of marketing entity that unites all of the utilities and all of the efficiency programs. As I mentioned, net metering is we are grid tied. We do not have a battery. There's not an off-grid home. Net metering is a really important policy that supports the residential solar industry. We could have a whole webinar on net metering, but then also the state still does have residential solar rebates. But what I'll say is that the amount that goes into the Renewable Energy Fund has been falling as renewable energy has gotten cheaper, and as the utilities have had to pay less in the way of alternative compliance payments. And so those rebates are used up fairly quickly. So you should apply early in the year if you're hoping to get one. But I would also say don't base your financial calculus on whether or not you'll get one, because it's not guaranteed. And then lastly, and this is, I forgot a feature. Lastly, all of the various appliances, which I guess I don't have to go in the basement to show off an appliance, are eligible for rebates through Energy Star as well. And so, there's the compressor unit, or the condenser unit, I guess it's called, for the air source heat pump. And that unit, I think, was eligible at the time for an $800 rebate. I believe New Hampshire is currently at $250 per ton. So you're, depending on what type of home, I think that's a 2-ton unit. So now that would be a $500 rebate. Many older homes, if you were to try to convert an older home to electric, would probably be more like a 4-ton unit. So you get maybe a $1,000 rebate for an air source heat pump. And so that's the rough sketch of, I think in terms of state rebates that we took advantage of for the house, we probably got a total of maybe $8,000 back from the state for building in this way. Which again, if rough numbers here, the house was going to be $250,000, and if $25,000 of that was more expensive because of the style of building that we were doing, but then we got $8,000 back, you can start to calculate the payback period, which frankly is incredibly fast. So the typical homeowner in New Hampshire, the state energy strategy, which was released this spring, estimated that your typical homeowner spends about $4,000 a year for their energy costs, and this house is more like $200 a year. So if we're, you can do the gross payback calculation. It's like a 10-year payback just for, it's like a 6-year payback without the rebates, and then the rebates just sweeten that all the more. So that's my whole spiel, I think.
Sam, so I don't see any questions in the chat, and I think that it's because you're such a remarkable presenter. So just giving folks a last chance to drop any questions into the chat. Like Sam said, he not only has his home, but he's also using transportation in the electric way as well.
I will say my favorite way to get to work is on my bicycle, which still is more efficient than my car. But not everyone could do that. It takes a certain amount of life design, and also don't want to suggest that if you can't ride a bike to work for whatever reason, that's a no moral judgment. We're all just getting through our days.
Oh, I think we have a question. So Sam, are you in Unitil territory?
We are in Unitil territory.
Okay, so,
and a quick.
Oh, sorry.
Just a real quick, funny sort of anecdote. When we considered doing a battery, we were like, well, how often will we really lose power? And we almost never lose power. And when I learned the reason why, which is that we're on the same circuit. We're gonna look at the poles out there. You probably can't see. We're on the same circuit as the hospital. And what I learned is that circuits that hospitals are on tend to be very reinforced. And so if you don't want to have to pay for a backup generator, just live near a hospital. That's what I learned. Anyway, yes, we're in Unitil territory.
Yeah, so Stephen Morin had just, I think it was more of a statement. So it sounds like the same heat pump rebate as Eversource. The electric co-op is about $500 per ton at 12,000 BTU.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right. I frankly have not been as diligent as I should have been in terms of keeping up with where the rebates are at in the new efficiency, the new New Hampshire Saves 2-year plan. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and another question from Henry: any resources for Geothermal Solutions heat pumps in New Hampshire?
So geothermal heat pumps are subject to the same system. So you can get a rebate from New Hampshire Saves for a geothermal heat pump as well. The challenge with geothermal is that the upfront costs can be so much higher because you have to sink a well, or if you're doing a closed loop system, you sink multiple wells. And so whereas our air source heat pump, which is a really simple system, right? 1 compressor, 2 heads, one outdoor unit, 2 indoor units. I always say compressor, and I think that's not quite sure what the correct terminology is. That was around $9,000 all in to install, versus a typical ground source heat pump system easily can be $25,000 or more. And so they're much more efficient. They use much less electricity to heat a home. But the question is, does that efficiency translate into a favorable payback period for that investment? And often it doesn't, but it really does depend on the house. So if you have a bigger home that has a bigger heating requirement, it might make sense to go geothermal. It's just going to cost you more upfront, and so that's a struggle. And I really I tell everybody who's contemplating it, just build yourself a spreadsheet or find someone who can build a spreadsheet for you to try to estimate your operation costs versus your upfront costs, and try to figure out how long it would take for a geothermal system to pay off compared to an air source heat pump.
Yeah, and it sounds like Dana mentioned that payback for geo usually runs for about 30 years.
Right, and that has been the challenge, and frankly, this is something I hear quite a lot about, which is that the geothermal industry as a whole is really trying to figure this out. Is it how what are the technological innovations that they need in order to drive down their upfront costs, and what that sort of interestingly, what that really comes down to are sort of newer, more efficient drilling techniques that are less from the sort of like, because essentially a lot of the techniques that we're using for geothermal come from the well drilling field, but frankly, I think a lot of technologies from oil and gas are going to lend themselves to bring down the costs for geothermal as well. And the other thing I hear quite a lot about lately is larger sort of like neighborhood scale ground source geothermal systems as being a way to deal with that problem, because if you get economies of scale if you're hooking up 20, 30 houses as opposed to just one at a time.
Great.
So that is something, there's actually money for that in the IRA for those and I believe there actually was money in the infrastructure law as well, that particularly are looking at sort of like campus style geothermal systems, and I think that's really the sweet spot. What I'd say is that for a house like this, the key is if you build it tight enough, you have such a small need, like it doesn't need that many BTUs, and so you can get away with an air source heat pump that's much less expensive up front. And like for us, we hardly ever use it because there's so much gain from the sunlight in the course of the winter.
Excellent. Dana also has another comment that we can address offline, so thank you for that, Dana. But Sam, you
Can't
wait. Yeah, can't wait. You did mention the IRA. So Clean Energy New Hampshire will be hosting a series of webinars coming up in the next couple months as we're kind of working through what all it entails. Our first one is actually on electric vehicles, which I believe is Tuesday, September 27th at noon. Yep. So we'll have some folks joining for that. Who's joining?
But we will have one. We will have one on energy efficiency as well, and the impacts for home electrification. There's a lot in there for both energy efficient building techniques and for zero carbon heating technologies. But one thing I will say, this is something that everybody on this call should do. A lot of that money is only going to come to New Hampshire if our state Department of Energy writes up a proposal and sends it into the federal government to go after that money. And so that is something that we need to be thinking really proactively about, is how do we help New Hampshire's Department of Energy to actively pursue that funding, because it could be truly transformational.
Absolutely.
And the people who are on the webinar in 2 weeks about EVs, they're from the National Auto Dealers Association, who have really dug into the EV section of that bill. I will say that for those who are following closely the politics of the IRA, Senator Manchin was very skeptical of the EV programs, and so it's actually a miracle that they survived into the final bill at all. And so there's good and bad in those sections, and I think the top line is that the number of vehicle models that are available for a tax rebate shrank dramatically as soon as the bill went into effect. But hopefully, as American manufacturing comes online, the list will start to grow again. So tune in for more in 2 weeks.
And as we mentioned before, I will follow up with the recording of the webinar, so you'll have all sorts of information, some of the links that we posted in the chat, as well as those upcoming events that we have as well. So a couple other events coming up that you want to put on your radar is the next YPiE event, which is actually on Sunday, September 25th in Kingston. We're actually going to have our kind of final outdoor adventure on the lake. You can bring your own stand-up paddleboards, kayaks, canoes, but there'll also be some available. So if you're feeling adventurous and want to take a dip in the lake with us, I'm not sure what the temperatures will look like, but for those that are brave, please feel free to join us. And the annual LES conference is going to be held on Friday, October 14th in Manchester. Larger venue, more exhibitors, great sessions. We just revealed our session topics in the latest Clean Energy New Hampshire email. But anything else that you want to add for the LES conference, Sam?
No, it's going to be great, and I'm hoping to see you all there.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you around.
Be well.